Welcome everybody, and thank you, Shaq, who's going to be co-presenting with me as well. But I'll start and get us rolling. I even have a official PowerPoint that I'll get shared with y'all. And it was funny. I ended up doing this PowerPoint in, just putting it all together. And there's that fun design function you can click, which is why for the first time when I was testing this out a couple hours ago, I realized they put in animation and it looks really fancy. So luckily it doesn't get too complicated after this. But welcome everybody. I see we've got a couple familiar faces on and some new people as well. And this is our second ever community engagement job alike meeting. So thanks for joining. We thought it would be useful, since we're at the beginning of the job alike meetings, to talk first about just some basic stuff, definitions, kind of the language we use, some basic ideas too. So we're going to take this time to go over that, go over some information at the end about the language that we use and sometimes how the words we use impact the message that we're trying to deliver. So as you can imagine, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more to be said about all these topics, but we've got kind of 15 minutes that we'll squeeze it into, and then we've got plenty of time afterwards to talk about it as well. So the first one is, what is community engagement versus outreach? And for me, this was personally relevant because with our team, we're considered the community outreach team. So when we were talking with the other hosts and the other leaders of these job alike groups, community engagement was a term that was being used more frequently. And so the question for me was, what's the difference? And in my research, I came to understand for community outreach, that's often used to describe often shorter term projects or something that is project or goal based. Whereas community engagement refers to maybe the overall larger goal of connecting with a community. It's longer term, it's relationship based. It's about creating a conversation and creating a space for people to connect, build power, and act in their own interests. So job descriptions aside, I think of if community engagement is the goal, a place where we can create lasting space for people to problem solve and work together, then community outreach would be a tool along that path to get there. So if you're hosting an event where you're trying to distribute food to 100 clients in a park, that could be an outreach event towards an overall goal of engagement. And this graphic I really like. We got it from the, what was it called? Principles of Community Engagement, 2nd edition. And this was a booklet that was actually published by NIH and the CDC, which is a really cool booklet because they just emphasize how community involvement is essential to recognize health concerns and to create interventions. And of course, they're talking about human health, but we know that it all relates to everything that we're talking about with pet health and pet care. So for me, this diagram's great. I'm a visual learner. It helps kind of show the relationship between outreach and what they're kind of calling shared leadership, or that engagement philosophy. So it's not that they're opposing or anything. It's just that they're working along maybe a spectrum where we're moving towards more increased trust, increased communication, and overall increased impact. So that leads to the very core question of why engage with the community in the first place? Like, why is this so essential to make this happen? And I think it starts with the very basic idea that health starts in our communities. Health starts where we live, where we learn, where we work, and where we play. And we're recognizing that lifestyles, that behavior and health are all shaped by both our physical and our social environments. So we know that many Americans face significant barriers to pet care. And often these barriers are related to those social or physical environments that people find themselves in. An example would be a pet owner. Maybe they live 5 miles from the nearest vet clinic, but they don't have a car and their dog's vaccinations are due, right? That's a significant barrier that's going to have an effect on the outcome of what sort of care that pet is receiving. That doesn't at all relate to the owner's willingness or drive to get that pet care. So we know that there's barriers there, but we're also recognizing that barriers are best addressed by the people who are experiencing these barriers and who have the best understanding of what the most appropriate solutions would be. So maybe from an outsider's perspective, if you live 5 miles from a vet clinic, you should just hop in a car and drive there. But we all know from personal experience, that's not always a viable solution for people. So we know there's barriers. We know that the people that are experiencing those barriers are going to have the most insightful solutions and insightful feedback on what solutions could be. So it really hinges on the fact that we believe that people should have the opportunity to make choices that allow them and allow their pets to lead healthy lifestyles. So any sort of solutions that we're looking at have to take into account the diverse perspectives and the diverse situations that people find themselves in. And I'm going to hand it over to Shaq for this part.
Hey everyone. So this was a hot topic for me, just because I have been working with the community for so long, and I know that sometimes the more organizations do more work, we tend to talk to each other about what languages should be used, but it appears as though the community doesn't get that until later on. And so community engagement was something that I've done all along. So I never thought about it as one's an outreach and one's an engagement, just because everything is long-term to me. Every contact I make is long-term to me. Like there's really no short thing, because when you do an outreach, the ultimate goal is that they're still reaching out to us so that we can constantly engage them at any point in time. And also the last slide had a picture of cat food, which was $2.89. And that was literally at a gas station in a different part of the city in DC. And so that picture was taken because this is why we engage the community, because the resources may be limited. And again, like this 9 Lives can at Walmart is literally 50 cents. And as you can see, like they had dog food that was $10 for a 5-pound bag. And I couldn't believe it when I was just sitting there looking at all these different foods that they actually sold at a gas station. But again, there's no grocery store near the gas station, but they were charging these very, very high prices, which goes back to why we engage. But going back to the next slide about who we're trying to reach or who we're trying to engage, it's everyone at all times. Again, I never look at it as though, one contact is it's everyone. And most people may consider that you may have, it's just these people who need assistance. Well, obviously it's anyone that may need assistance. And this client specifically, like she also needed, some medical care for her pet, but also for herself. As you can see, she walks with a cane. And so this is everyone and anyone that we're able to reach, who may not be able to come out to all of the pet pantries, who may fall through some of the gaps because she may be caring for her pet instead of caring for herself. And she definitely loves her animal. Like she has more than one dog, but she definitely loves her animals. They all eat different types of food, small bites, big bites. And she's a really involved client, but yet she can't get to all the different services that she needs. And she doesn't have internet. And I was surprised by that because she's, always on the go, but she didn't have a phone that had the internet. So she couldn't look up different things, but yet she could text or call. So we're always trying to engage everyone. To me, the engagement is just on different levels, because when we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page and all these other things that can reach one population. But of course, there are other populations who don't have those same type of resources. So we're always trying to engage everyone, because we cast out that net, that's going to catch everyone that needs it. And maybe some still may not get it, but the whole point is to cast it out and catch whoever is going to be there. Okay. Understanding the culture in the community is super important. When I first started doing this, I myself had many assumptions because I was a humane law enforcement officer at one point. And so I was like, oh my God, I'm going to see dogs chained up outside. I'm going to see all of these terrible things. Like I had my mind a certain way, which I was totally wrong, because I saw what, just like this picture, cats, and more cats. And this is the ear-tip cat that came and visited us just last Thursday. But I was surprised by that. And so understanding the community and the culture is really important. And just using other organizations to help figure out what the needs are. This is on a property of a church, and they give out people food at least every other Thursday, every Saturday. And so the pastor talked about the need for pet food as well. So when I talked to him about, trying to partner with them, he was ecstatic about that, because those were some of the needs. And on this field that we're on, it was literally dog fecal matter everywhere on that field. And so people came out, so we definitely giving out the poop bags and everything else because that is what's needed. And you definitely need to know like what's going on in the community. Like some communities may have high crime and things like that, different times of the day, different days of the week. There may be certain things going on. And it's really important that you know that without just assuming that you can come and talk about any issue. So it's really important to understand any culture of any city that you work in. Sometimes we encounter people who would love to bring their programs that they do in other places. And that's always awesome, but you still have to figure out what works in your city or your state or your small community, urban or rural, whatever. You have to figure out like what works, what has been working and what isn't working before you introduce something that another city is doing. Because then you may say, oh, well, we did this back there. And when you introduce it here, it may be a total blow up because the community is not going to accept how things are going. So I think just always respecting the culture is really important. Like in DC, we have different issues, whether it's music, whether it's, gentrification, whether it's all these different things. But once you get to know people and understand, I think that makes our job easier because we're not assuming, how people are, but we're respecting them and working with them as we continue to partner just to help their pet and also give them resources. Okay. Coalition building. I love to network with other people organizations because we are the only animal organization in DC that provides different services, but it's just really important for any organization to build people organizations because they have all the other resources. This is Mr. Silas with his dogs in this picture, and he was at one of the outreach events, and they had, of course, as you can see, the pretrial service, they had the police department, they had health agencies, all of these other organizations who are helping the community. And then of course we're there too, because people bring their pets. And I was surprised that people were actually going to bring their pets to things like this because it's tons of people, tons of kids walking around. But it was really exciting to see him bring out his dogs for this event. So, and not only is the animal piece big, but I think that we can also share information with other organizations that are there, because while I'm at the event working and I have somebody else working the event, I also visit the other tables because the goal is to build relationship with the pretrial service, with the other organizations that are on site. Again, it's constantly building because we can't stand alone. It's not a standalone issue. It's not just, oh, animals. And sometimes, just for instance, today I did an outreach event where we give away people food, and the people who were there, and there were cameras, we had they had a group of Amazon people come out and film commercials and things like that, which today I didn't know it was going to be like that, but it was like that today. And the person was like, oh, we're from National Capital Area Food Bank. And I never thought about it being a pet food desert because I had treats and food and toys. They were like, I never thought about that. And of course, this is a people food desert. That's why you're here giving these big boxes of food away, but they never thought about that. And so I was able to go right in and share my information and say, hey, there's only one main grocery store. There is no vet in this community. There is no pet store in this community, which helped them to get a bigger view of this animal group just coming out to have a table, just to sit here and give out animal stuff. Because sometimes people think that's all we do is, oh, they're here helping the animals. Well, no, it actually helps the owners. And I had the opportunity to have this conversation with people that were at this event, which I thought was great because I was like, oh, can I get your card? Because we want to be able to continue that conversation. So when they have other locations that they're doing, we're able to constantly have more dialogue so that they'll see it as a bigger picture and not just like, oh, we're giving away people boxes of food, but maybe they may be able to add on pet food at some point too. So, and these organizations also know the community because they're in the community on a regular basis. And so they already know some of the ins and the outs of the communities. This can also help us to build trust in the community. And I will admit that if there's an organization that has a bad rep, then that may not help you as much. But say if they're doing a lot of good work in the community and you're partnering with them and you're collaborating with them, then the people in the community say, oh, I saw them with this group, 3 weeks ago. And I see them again with this group. I see them with this group. So they constantly get to see you partner with different people groups. And it is a way to build trust in the community. I think that sometimes trust, it can be broken very easily in the animal world and dealing with different crime. Like I know that when I'm in DC, if something happens and they're like, oh, the police were out here. It took them 3 hours to come, but y'all come out here for a stray dog. Y'all come out here really quickly, and people will then compare like the animal life with the people life. And so us partnering shows that both of those things matter. There's not one greater than the other. They all go together and they all matter. So that can also help with, building relations with the community. And again, also your continuation with partnering with other groups and building trust and just constantly collaborating with them. Okay. Representation from the community. I know that sometimes when we do things, we don't necessarily include the community because we may think that we know what's best for the community. These community members, in this picture specifically, they decided to have their own Halloween party at a big park that they're trying to get a dog park at. And I know that they have different types of dogs, different animals. And so part of my conversation was like, yes, we do need to bring the community in because they know what they need. They're working hard to get a dog park. In certain parts of the city, they spent over $1 million on dog parks in DC, and they're barely trying to give $200,000 for this one in Ward 8. And so when you're dealing with that type of thing, these people are also fighting for basic rights. They're not only fighting for like, oh, we want a dog park, but hey, they need a pet store. Hey, we need like more people types of programs for our community. And so we do need to bring them in to engage them because again, they know what their community needs. And also, the more that the community members stand up, they're also fighting and to feel empowered to take on other issues in their community. Sometimes, again, people think that it's just about the animal, but it's not because, again, if their animals don't have what they need and people don't have food or there's a desert where they can't get fresh fruit and vegetables, there are bigger issues going on constantly. And working with the community, I've learned that me giving them information empowers them to now tell their neighbors. This empowers them to now say, oh, yeah, that isn't right. That's wrong. I'm going to do more. And that continues to empower the community that they have a voice, which I think is important anywhere you go, because once they feel empowered and they have a voice, then they can make change in their own communities on different levels, not just animals, not just food, but even crime. And again, sometimes people don't consider all of these things that go together, but I also did like humane education for 10 years and kids, just talking about lessons of being a snitch and what's the definition of that. And they felt helpless. And they also feel like, say if they got robbed, they're a snitch, or say if a dog got hit by a car, if they tell they're a snitch. Either way, they feel that they're snitches in those situations. Not to say that I get robbed, that was wrong, but I can't tell because that'd be snitching. And so the community may have a different perspective. And if we empower them, that gives them the ability to see themselves also in a different light, but again, to fight for more things that they need in their community, which they deserve. And it also gives people dignity. I don't think people thinking about that word a lot, dignity, just giving people the right to be heard, the right to be seen, compared to like, I'm here kind of thing. But people are now feeling more and more empowered, I think, as time goes on, but also they definitely need to have it for their pets. And again, this is just the start of being an advocate for something. Okay.
You want to go ahead? Okay. So yeah, the last slide, we just corralled a couple of like common words or phrases because we were realizing in our talks that the language that we use is super important. And obviously this is just a handful of a couple scenarios, but if we're first and foremost, if our aim is to be building relationships and increasing communication with people, we want to make sure that we're avoiding offending folks by maybe some like implied assumptions in the words that we're using, and also that we're delivering the information in a clear and compelling way. So, right, just some basics. So instead of one of the examples Shaq gave was, some people go around talking about, hey, I'm here to educate you on pet stuff, which, right, it talks down to people. So looking at it from a more positive, like I've got some information to share, that sort of thing. One of the ones that I saw a great talk that was all about terms with cats, but maybe instead of using feral cats, using community cats, like that ear tipped one that came up to Shaq's event, where that's very obviously a friendly community cat and not necessarily a mean feral cat that doesn't want to be touched. And then the two terms at the bottom I actually got from this great PDF that I was looking through. So it talks about poverty as well as low income and just different ways to talk about that. So with poverty, using phrases like families who can't afford the basics in life, or for low income, people who are work for a living and still can't pay their rent. And in the PDF, it was really interesting because they were talking about, in these cases, right, that both terms are technically accurate, but the second kind of recommended term is more representative of how we relate to people on a day-to-day basis. So it can be a more compelling way when you're talking with a diverse group of stakeholders to kind of rally support without alienating people. So it's interesting because we're in community engagement. I think we're definitely in the place where we're talking to people that we're trying to provide resources to, and then also talking to people that we're trying to receive resources from to provide. So you find yourself on a lot of different levels trying to convey messages and trying to keep it simple, keep it informational, and keep it compelling.
Can I ask a quick, what everyone thinks? I can save this. It really has to do with language, though.
Great. No, I think now's a great time to go into questions.
At risk always bothers me. And I wanted to see what others thought of that language as well.
That's a good one.
And if anyone has found, because I don't feel like, you often hear youth at risk. But who's just, I just based on either where they live, the community they come from. And so I just often struggle with I hear outward, and I try not to I ask my team not to use the language, but I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I totally agree, because it's, depending on where you at, I think in the country, at risk might mean something totally different to one group than another, so totally agree that it's not a one size fits all word, kind of two words.
Yeah.
It's not a one size fits all.
Because we want to work with youth at risk, and I don't, youth at risk could mean maybe their parents are incarcerated, or maybe they have families that have drug. I don't, to me, it'd be like people who are going through a crisis, not just where they come from or what their income level is, or so still working on. It might be a good project for us to brainstorm some.
I think even like the last term you used, Elke, like people going through a crisis, to me, that's super compelling because it's relatable, right? Where you're like, oh, a crisis, and you could get specific depending on the term, but I'll share the PDF that I was referring to at the end because I found it fascinating. It was a group that did like research into, they were trying to come up with more relatable terminology for the social determinants of health was the phrase they were like workshopping, that they were like, nobody gets this. It sounds terrible. No, like some people know what you're talking about, but it doesn't like work. And so they just like go so into detail about it. I'll share it in the chat because I found it fascinating from like this academic standpoint. But I think ultimately it comes down to like using simple words that like relate to people where they're at. So yeah, people that are going through crisis, I'm like, I get that. I kind of know what that means. And you can tell me more about the crises, but I know what it's like.
And this doesn't really have anything to do with this necessarily, but language in general, and talking, using words that people really understand. We're doing a website audit for supported self-rehoming. And, all of us in the industry have things on our websites that say, surrender your pet, rehome your pet. And yet the most searched thing is get rid of my pet, get rid of my dog, or get rid of my cat. So we really have to be using terminology that people understand and are using. It might sound nicer and softer, but that's not necessarily how people are speaking.
Hey, Jamie, for those that don't know you, would you mind introducing yourself and what you do, and maybe also sharing where you used to work before?
Sure, I'm a lurker in this group. My name is Jamie Case. I'm the Maddie's Human Animal Support Services Project Manager currently. Prior to this work, though, I was the Executive Director for 11 years of Gateway Pet Guardians in East St. Louis, Illinois. We started community work in East St. Louis about 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago now. So we were doing a lot of boots on the ground engagement and outreach before anyone else was doing it. I felt like I was alone on an island for a very long time, trying to do this really impactful work. And now the whole nation's doing it. So I was super excited to jump on the Haas bandwagon because it was transformational for our community, and I can't wait to see it happen across the country. So you all are rock stars in my book.
Yeah, Jamie Case is one of the real OGs, just like Shaq. Shaq, you've been doing this for what, 20 years, 20 some odd years now?
So my anniversary date was October 30th. It's been 27 years in the ultimate field, right? And again, it was from, humane law enforcement, humane education to now this part. But I saw the humane law enforcement as a form of outreach, again, because it was like, we were intervening. There was no like this work now that we do, which is the, pre-work of, hey, before we even get to that point, now we can help you out. So yeah, I'm happy that it's now the whole people and animal piece as well, just because I've been talking about that since I was an officer. So I'm excited that now those things have definitely impacted different organizations and people are looking at it more.
And I didn't, prior to, I did the same thing. We became, in Illinois, the state of Illinois, you could become humane officers, humane, I forget what they called us, volunteers could represent an organization and become humane officers or something. And it was such an official, like, punitive feeling thing that we were like tasked with, but that was the only way that we felt like we could really get out into the community. So it's just amazing how the industry has changed in the past 7 years, 6 years, whatever it is, 5 years even, where it's more normal for people to be out in the community talking about pet ownership, and it's just exciting.